All right, I'm going to mute everyone and continue that and unmute Jane. Okay, Jane, could you unmute yourself? Apparently I can't. Thank you. All right. This brings us to our last storyteller for the evening, Jane Dorfman. Jane Dorfman tells traditional stories and fairy tales, as well as a few personal stories about her New Orleans childhood and her Maryland neighbors. Shh, don't tell them she's telling stories about them. She has recently tried liars contests and finds them very liberating. She tells at festivals and libraries, and during this lockdown, she is telling online. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Jane Dorfman.
Oh, thank you. How is the volume here? Good? Okay. This is a Scandinavian story called The Lindworm. And long, long ago and far away from here, there was a king and a queen who had a peaceful kingdom and a happy life, but no children. And the queen's barrenness and her inability to conceive worried her day and night. She was in the woods one day and weeping a little over this plight when an old woman came up to her and asked her, "Why are you crying?" "Oh," said the queen, "we have been married many years and we have no children." "I can help you," said the old woman. "You must do exactly what I say." Well, the queen did not half believe her, but she listened. And the old woman said, "Do this. Go to the palace and bring back a silver cup with 2 handles way into the woods, and prick your finger and drop 2 drops of blood upon the ground, and cover it with the cup, and come back tomorrow, and you will find 2 roses, a red one and a white one. You eat the white one for a girl and the red one for a boy, but do not eat them both." The queen, feeling a bit of a fool, she went back to the palace and she got a silver cup with 2 handles, and she took it far into the woods, and she pricked her finger on a thorn and dripped out 2 drops of blood and covered it with the cup. And she hurried back before anyone could be aware of her foolishness. But in the morning she went back, and as she lifted the cup, there were 2 roses, a white and a red. Oh, and she looked and she said, "Well, my husband would love a son, but if I have a son, he may go off to war and be killed. Where if I have a daughter, well, she will stay with me, and she may even give me grandchildren one day." And she thought, and finally she ate one of the roses, and the taste was so intoxicating, and the smell was so delicious that without even noticing what she was doing, she ate the other one as well. Now, soon it became clear that the queen was indeed with child, and the king and the whole kingdom were delighted. But the king was called away to war just at the moment when the baby should be born, and he said, "Be sure to send message and tell me what the child is." Now the queen was in labor, and she'd sent all of her maids away, and she was there with only the midwife. And the room was strewn with sweet rushes, and candles were lit, and the labor pains were coming hard, and suddenly the queen was delivered of not a baby, but a lindworm, a tiny dragon, black with little hands, and she and the midwife were both so shocked they swept it off the bed, and it scuttled away under the rushes. Before they had a chance to absorb this shock, the contractions came again, and this time a beautiful baby boy was born. And when the queen thought back of that, she thought it was in the midst of the pains, or perhaps the midwife gave me a draught against the pain, and that caused that evil dream. And she didn't think about it again for 18 years. Now the child who was born was a delight. He was handsome and clever, his parents doted on him, and he grew into a fine young man. When he got to be about 18 and of marriageable age, he decided to go off and court his sweetheart. But as he rode his horse to the crossroads, up in front of him came a huge monster, a black dragon, and it said, "The oldest son must marry first." And the boy reined in his horse, and he took another road, but there ahead of him again was the dragon with a mouthful of teeth saying, The oldest son must marry first, my bride before yours. And the young man tried a third road, and it happened a third time. But this time, he said, the oldest son must marry first, and my bride before yours, brother. Now, the young man was so shocked that he wheeled his horse around and rode as fast as he could back to the palace. And he ran into his parents and he told them this story. And his mother went as pale as milk and looked as if she might faint. And her husband bore her up, and she closed her eyes, and she told her husband and son the story of the two roses, of the horrible birth, and that this thing was her son. And indeed, it was the young man's brother. Well, the king did not know what to do, but he went out and he found the Lindworm, and he told it to come back to the palace with him. And the only place that was big enough was the old dungeons deep beneath the palace. And there the Lindworm was housed. And they could hear it in the night. The oldest son must marry first. The king knew he must find a bride for this creature. So he sent to a distant kingdom and had the princess come, mentioning only that she would marry his son and not saying which one. And she didn't get a glimpse of him till she stood beside him in the chapel, and the monster was next to her. And she was taken away to the bridal chamber. And the king and the queen went in timidly the next day, for they had heard sounds in the night. And they found the Lindworm asleep and the wedding gown covered with blood. Well, they got a hold of themselves and they went back to their chambers, but again they heard the Lindworm down below. The oldest son must marry first, a bride for me before a bride for you, brother. And the king tried again. And another girl was brought, and another wedding where she did not see the groom, and the result was the same. They went in, the Lindworm was asleep, the room was spattered with blood, and the wedding gown was torn to shreds. Now the brother, the prince, the king, and the queen, they could not think what to do, but they could hear the Lindworm down in the basement demanding a bride. And so the king, for he already had 2 other kingdoms ready to wage war on him, he went to his old shepherd. He said, "You have a daughter, do you not?" And the shepherd says, "Yes, oh, she is the love of my life. She must come and marry my son." "No, he had heard these terrible, no, she is all I have." And the king said, "She must come. I will send my soldiers for her in the morning." So the shepherd went and he told his beloved daughter that she must marry this monster. And he wanted her to flee, but she could not. She knew they would be after her, and furthermore, they would take their revenge upon her father. She asked for a few moments alone. She would walk in the woods one last time and collect her thoughts. And as she wept and walked and wept and walked, there came an old woman. "Oh, why are you crying, my dear?" "Oh, tomorrow I must marry a monster. He has already killed 2 brides. I will be the next." "I will help you," said the old woman, "but you must do exactly what I say." And the girl promised. "You must wear 10 shifts under your gown. You must ask for a vat of lye and a vat of milk and enough willow wands, as many as a boy could carry. And the Lindworm will ask you in the wedding chamber to shed a shift, and you must tell him to shed a skin. And when he has done that 10 times, you must beat him with the willow rods dipped in the lye, for the evil he has done must be beaten out of him. And then you must soak him in the milk, and then you must take him to bed and wrap your arms around him." Now the girl thought that this last thing would be the hardest of all, but she promised to do exactly what the old woman said. She stood beside the Lindworm in the wedding chapel. She was pale but upright, and then she was led to the bridal chamber. And the great Lindworm stood before her with his fangs and teeth, and he said, "Shed a shift, fair maiden." And she turned to him and said, "Shed a skin, worm. How can you say this to me? No one has talked to me like this." And she said, "I talk to you like this. I command you, shed a skin." And the Lindworm writhed and twisted and dropped one of his skins to the floor. and she covered it with her shift. And again the Lindworm said, "Shed a shift, fair maid." And she said, "Slough a skin, Lindworm." And he writhed and twisted and dropped a second skin, and she covered it with a shift. And so this went for all 9 shifts. And with each skin the Lindworm took off, it was more painful, and it tore more, and it pained him, and he howled and screeched until he was there, just a bloody mass. And then the girl took the willow rods, and she dipped them in the lye, and she beat him with them until he was covered with blood. And then she took what was left of him and put it in the vat of milk. And she bathed him and poured the milk over and poured the milk over. And then she picked him up and she carried him to the bed. She pulled back the covers and she laid him gently down on the soft sheets. And she crawled into bed with him, and though she knew she would not be able to go to sleep, she was so tired that she wrapped her arms around him and slept. Now the king and queen were very fearful of what they would see the next morning, and they opened the door just a crack to check for another bloody wedding gown, but they saw nothing. And they opened it a tiny bit more, and there in the bed was the young woman and the handsomest young man they had ever seen. And they awoke and had a joyful wedding breakfast, much happier than the wedding. The deeds of the Lindworm were not forgotten. The image of that black and twisted worm was put in all their coats of arms. And never was there a daughter-in-law who was more cherished than the shepherd's daughter. For she had saved not only their son, she had saved their kingdom. And they all lived happily ever after. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you. I love that story.
Yes.
So well done.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane.
You're welcome. Thank you
That
all
was
for
wonderful.
coming. This was wonderful to see you all.
It's been wonderful having everyone. That is the end of our program. We can stay on for a few more minutes, and so we can, if you want to chat with our tellers, that'll be dandy. You can just unmute yourself. I would like to let folks know that Voices in the Glen will be having a Halloween program coming up, shockingly enough, around Halloween. More details will be available through the same avenue that you found out about tonight. So thank you everyone for coming. And now,
if this has made you hungry for more stories, Voices in the Glen has a swap that is open to everyone, free every month. I haven't yet decided on the date for September, but it'll be on Voices in the Glen's website. And everybody is invited to tell or to listen. So please join us again.